Welcome to Soulful Practices podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Holling Brooks, and over the past 20 years, I have been on a journey of healing and awakening. I'm also a coach and practitioner for clients on their journey of unbridling their true self. The number one question I'm asked is, what meditation or practice will help me reach my goals? While there is no one meditation or secret mantra that will unlock our own awakening, there is a doorway that will lead us there. And that's the doorway of learning and cultivating the skills of self-reflection and contemplation. Each episode of this podcast offers you pocket teachings and practices that you can implement right away to help you courageously connect with living your authentic soul-led life. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of season 2 of Soulful Practices. And this episode is all about bringing us into movement with the soul medicines of love and compassion. And the pocket teacher that I have for this week is from a mystic and a somewhat controversial spiritual teacher of Osho. And Osho was quoted in saying, "Don't move the way fear makes you move. Move the way love makes you move." I love this quote. Just like let's sit with it for just a moment and not just breeze past it. Like really invite you to move the way love makes you move. So what he's really inviting us into opening to exploring, to playing with, is shifting from fear moving us to the way love wants to move us. And this quote is just wow. When this kind of came into my sphere and I started to really to kind of explore some of the different teachings, this is also when at the same time we were talking about divine timing in episode 14, the idea of somatic movement was coming in, and myofascial release, and the water within our system holding memory and holding us, binding us in through our fascia system into habitual postures, ways of being, ways of breathing, the way in which our mind kind of settles into its different thing. And so all these threads were moving together. And at the same time, when I kind of stumbled across some of these teachings and that invitation to release moving from fear, moving me automatically, forcing me into literal body positions, holding myself, my jaw, my neck, my back, my shoulders, my hips. And then also, how was it holding me energetically? And opening instead to the way in which we move through love, through compassion. And what would that look like? What would that feel like? What would that awaken within ourselves? And how would that ripple out into the universe around me, to my life, to my choices, to all those different things? And so one of the big, huge different things that also comes in, and while he's somewhat controversial in the spiritual teachings world, is because he invites us into this idea that meditation is not solely just sitting, closing our eyes, working on a mantra, silently like clearing the mind, focusing on a number, any of those things. He really invites and challenges that notion, and one of his constructing beliefs is that everything, any activity that we do, it is the atmosphere, the mindfulness of us, of how we are choosing to meet that moment from that stillness with that choice to move with love. Then everything that we do becomes the art of meditation. Our life becomes the art of meditation. And so the movement in which we start to engage is a meditation of allowing ourselves to connect more and more with love and less with fear. And when I think of like the side of our program, that this is also when I really started to understand, okay, why horses? Why working with equine partnered psychotherapy and coaching is able to bring forward some of the quote benefits that it does. This really landed with me, and I was like, oh, because people get to be in movement with love. They get to see what it feels like and interacts like, and what it relationally is like as they partner with the horses and with us as the team. They get to see the differences of the movements from fear and what happens as they start to attune more to the movements of love, right? And so the horses are just a beautiful way in which we can literally see it, and we see ourselves in motion versus the reflective, more talking that comes with coaching and traditional office therapy and other approaches. But we can bring that energy into almost everything that we do. And it really gives us an opportunity to say, okay, our life is like the arena in which I work with clients and over there on that side. And instead of horses, it's other beings. It could be a horse. It could be your animal beings, your coworkers, all the different things give us an opportunity to pause, move into stillness. And from that stillness, see, how do I want to move into the next moment? From my thoughts, from my emotions to my body. And how do we want to free that up so that it's more in alignment with that love energy than that fear energy? And once you feel it, there's no going back. Once you ring this bell of feeling this difference, of allowing yourself to feel what it's like to move from fear, forcing you into a habitual movement, to the pause and the choice and the liberation that comes with the movement of love, that part of you has awakened and it doesn't want to go back to sleep again. And what it wants to do is run around to all the other aspects of you within you, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and help them wake up too. To help them release the binding of the fear and the resentment. And like Osho is inviting us into, is really allowing us to challenge this idea that there's separation between our meditation and our spirituality practices and our life, the art of living, right? And bringing that into that reflective stance is the atmosphere in which we can have within ourselves that then allows us to look outward. This is kind of like the basics of soulful practices, right? To help us start to have this beautiful sacred witness energy that allows us to be in motion and in stillness, to have the pauses, the reflections, the choice points, and then moving forward. And one of the things that I think this quote really leans into, along with the other teachings that I have kind of in my toolbox, is that somatic conditioning, that myofascia habitual, and John Burns calls it the straitjacket within us, right? Like when we can understand that that is first has to meet our survival needs, then it gets to meet our personal needs. And if we're lucky and we get past those first two, now we can open up to that idea of what are our soul needs? What are our heart needs? And the way that we can do that is really in noticing the body, noticing our somatic conditioning in our literal movements, where we move into collapse, where we move into push, like, right? Where we move into like, openness and flow, where we're bracing, holding, all those different ways that we have conditioning built into this form allows us to see beyond the smoke screen, so to speak, of habitual movements that we do not feel connected to, right? And what happens when we come into this stillness? The reason why we don't stay here very often, this all sounds really good. Who wouldn't sign us up for noticing that? Like, who wouldn't be like, absolutely, Michelle, I want to be able to figure that out. I want to be able to see that, sense it, hear it. As when we slow down to this pause, this bell that cannot be unrung, what we feel is all the noise, right? All the chatter, all the information, the bracing, the yearning, the striving, the pushing, the pulling, all of the different things that our body is a messenger for, that has been wanting to be tended to, that's screaming to be tended to. It starts coming forward, and it comes forward fast, and it comes forward almost like it feels like a freight train, right? And oftentimes we don't know how to sort it. We don't know how to breathe through it. We don't even know what to do with it, right? And so all that chatter that's inside our body being is just trying to share with us all of the needs. The problem is most of those needs are out of time. They're from years and years and years ago, but our body doesn't know that because our body is timelessness. It doesn't have a sense of coherent time linear time like we do, right? And so part of it is really gaining that comfort with being able to release ourselves from one, needing the story right off the bat, and two, just following the waves of the energy. And that's why somatic sensations and learning how to work with somatic processing was like super huge when we decide to look into that. And as I started to awaken to this invitation and I slowed down and I moved into the pause, that place in between a stimulus coming in from the outside world, that meditative moment to just witness, what is my body up to? What is my mind up to? What is my heart wanting to say? What's my soul want to say? That I realized that I had these real habitual, literal postures within my system. My jaw just wanted to stay clenched and locked all the time. My shoulders were like, you know, and I was like, whoa, this is like this whole collarbone, this whole like this whole front half was like bound and bound and bound with like bands and bands of straitjacket and my myofascia, right? Like I was actually not even connecting with the world through my five senses. So one of the exercises that I do with clients all the time that I'd love to bring here because I think it's really telling. It helps us slow down into this pause is I'd love for you to find like an object. It could be a simple object, if it's a big object. I kind of have like one of my favorite like earth rocks next to me that I just love. It just hangs next to me. You could use the object that like the seat that's holding you and all that other good stuff. And I'd like you to explore that object with your five senses. Like touch it. What's it feel like? So for me, maybe it's cool, rough, multiple edges, just like as if you were really exploring it for the first time. You can smell it. Does it smell a little hint of the river that it came out of? Oh, I just noticed, I saw with my eyes that there's a little M that my daughter put on it. I think that means mom or Michelle. That's interesting. I'd never noticed that before. And you could taste it. I'm not going to do but all those fun things. Does it have a sound to it? And then what does it feel like held in my hand? Like, what's my body doing it in reaction to it? And I'd love you to pause for a moment. I want you to bring out just the sensation of touch. I want you to touch that object. And I want you to notice, do you feel the object touching your hand, your finger, whatever it is, the surface, like so the sit bones, the leg that's attached to the chair if you're doing a chair, or is there something else in the mix? Is there a little narrator telling you a running dialogue? This is smooth, this has edges to it, so therefore it's cool. And the sensation of the touch is actually coming in second, or maybe not at all. So when I first figured this out, I was doing this very same exercise and it blew my mind. I realized that I wasn't feeling anything. I was talking about it. I had a mental narrator in between me and my five senses. And all of a sudden, I realized I don't think I'm alone in this. And so I like asked some of the different clients that I worked with. I was like, "Hey, let's try this out. Like, I'm curious. What are you feeling when it?" And consistently, now I've done this exercise for 10 years with clients. Consistently, 90% of clients have, if they have a felt sense of touch, it's with it or right behind the narrator. And some don't even have that felt sense of touch. When they really slowed down, they were like, I don't think I'm actually feeling it. And as I started to work with this exercise of simply like, can I feel, sense, see, hear, know through my senses versus my mind being a go-between, they realized that, oh, wow, my body is talking to me. It's working with me. And I just think that this is fascinating. And when you slow down and you kind of ask that question, like, what is that about? Why would there be a go-between my physical sense of touch and my actual processing of that touch? Why do I need a mental narrator in between there? Well, that's because this sense is going to go directly into my heart. It's going to have a heart dialogue with it. What is it sensing, feeling, thinking? And what is the relationship that it wants to have with it? Does it want to move closer in? Does it want to move far away? It has instantaneous information and responses with it. The mind, though, is going to hold up and separate that. Why would it separate that? Protection, right? Protection. And what is that? That is fear. So the movements in which we engage and work with the world in is through the filter of fear, not through the filter of our heart, right? And this just was like earth was flat, earth was round moment for me. When this finally like sunk in, it was like this answering to this question of like, wow, our mind really, really wants us to have acceptance. It wants to guide and edit our answers so that they match the people around us, so that we belong, so that we don't get humiliated, so we don't get targeted, so we all these different things. And it's has the power to even cut us off from our five senses. And if it can do that, what is it doing to our intuitive senses that run off the same pathways as our five senses? It's not necessarily a sixth sense. It's just that all of our senses of our felt sense, the clairsentience, of our vision, sight, right, clairvoyance, of our hearing, clairaudience, right, of that gut response, just that knowing that we don't have an explanation as to why we have that information. It's not in our mind, but yet it's here, it's there, right? Of being able to bring all those different through, including smell. So there's these things, taste and smell, clairaudience, and then bringing in clairgustance and clairalience. Everyone thinks like, oh, those would be such amazing clairs to have because you can interact with energies through the frequency of their smell and through their taste. But if you ever have tasted bacterias or viruses, they don't taste that good and they definitely don't smell that good. So while I love those clairs for certain aspects of it, like I can tell what a piece of fruit's going to taste like before I put it in my mouth, that's really nice and beautiful, and putting different things together of how like things are going to come together as far as a creation to taste good. Some of those aspects of that is not super fun. And then even like allowing like colors have a taste to them and they have a smell to them, and other stuff like that. So it can get wonky in here once you go more into those clairs. But it all starts with a willingness and a comfort with the mental being to let us start to actually interact with the world around us without the narrator, without the buffer of editing, so that we can respond to the world in a way that brings us more safety and security versus a way that actually is in alignment with our heart and our soul, of giving us that feedback of what is there. So part of this beautiful quote that he's inviting us into kind of awakening to is this concept that we do need to shift from the main construct, that first level of how we're going to interact with the world from a fear base, and shifting it over to that love base or love space, right? And really allowing us to say that it believes, the mind believes that the heart is going to also keep us safe. It's going to meet our survival needs. It's going to help us have that acceptance. But where the acceptance is going to come from is always going to be internal to us. If we have it external, great. Gumdrops and roses, sprinkles on top. But we don't need that to access ourselves, right? And that's a whole different ball of wax. So out at Unbridled Change, when we're working through the equine partnered psychotherapy or coaching or spirituality side that we have, we're really asking for our horses to engage with us with permission to respond and move from their own sentience. So if they didn't respond and move from their heart guiding them, they would be responding and moving from the conditioning of survival and appeasement and compliance guiding them. That would only teach somebody how to move more in their life with more fear, and it wouldn't help them shift into this whole new dialogue of moving from love, right? And one of the huge things that I am still a pretty big advocate for is freeing up that voice in all beings, right? Like allowing all beings to release from having to move from fear and allowing us to be able to move instead from love. Because when we're moving from that conditioning, we're trying to meet the needs of others around us in order for us to be safe, right? That's survival at all costs. We're going to abandon, we're going to do things that are not correct for us. We're going to move into connections, movements, agreements that are born from a place of disconnection, dis-ease, separation, and division versus unity, wholeness, and wellness. And so that's typically going to yield results where it's not going to give you love, compassion, all those things, because the ingredients that we're making that cake with is one from fear. So if we want to be able to empower ourselves with more self-love, acceptance, joy, laughter, empowerment, and we want to be able to offer that courageously in our life, through our lives, and to those around us, this is a key component really in there. So I had a client, there's two stories that I want to share in this episode with you that I think really bring us into the heart of this pocket teacher, right? I had a client that once said to me, and she was dead set on this. She was like, "You do not have therapy horses, Michelle." And I was a little curious. And it's like, I was like, okay, tell me more, share more about that. And she proceeded to tell me what a therapy animal should and should not do. And she believed that therapy animals should do what they're asked when they're asked to do it. They should remain still and open to being petted, to being loved on, to like all the things. When they're asked to move somewhere, they should move somewhere. When they're asked to stop, they should stop. And she just had this whole dialogue around what she thought a therapy animal should do. And then she went in to explain to me that my horse, not mine, the horses out here at Unbridled Change, that they acted very different. And so therefore they were not therapy horses, because they would pin their ears, they would walk away, they would refuse to move, they would not engage with somebody, they would engage with them and then move away. All these different things were happening that were outside of her construct of what a therapy horse should or should not do. They should be there to make her feel better. They should be there to help her not feel defeated or angry or upset or abandoned or any of these things that she was writing on top of what was happening in those sessions with her and that horse. And I was really impressed with her answer because for the most part, she was correct in her definition of what a therapy animal is, and by adjunct, what a therapy or a coach or anybody who's in that wellness and helping and facilitating therapy in some way, shape, form, or fashion should or shouldn't be doing. By that definition, she's correct. I don't have those horses. I'm not that person. That's not going to happen. We don't have those beings out here in this place. And it's because all of those movements that she was describing would be coming from fear, because they're not actually looking for true relationship. They're looking for instant gratification and appeasement, right? Dressed up pretty in this idea of love and compassion. So we talked about that a little bit in episode 14. If you're new to me, you'll realize that these episodes kind of build off of each other. I tend to treat everything like an ongoing course. So that's kind of the way it works. But they're also standalone at the same time. So when we have that aspect, when we have that expectation, we are moving from wounded parts of ourselves. We are moving from blended states, is what it's called in the part world, of that wound or that fear or that protective mechanism guiding us and demanding from our environment to meet these needs. And if those needs are not met, that equals harm. That equals pain. That equals suffering. That equals abandonment. That equals, in her words, rude horses, right? And so could we lean into that? Because as we kind of soften, and I said, okay, well, let's explore a little bit more. What we started to drill into is that there was this fear of rejection. Well, if they just came to me and stood next to me and didn't walk away, I wouldn't have to feel less than. I wouldn't feel unworthy or embarrassment or fear about reaching my hand out to touch the horse because I know it would stay there. And I was like, okay, I get that. I totally get that. Of course, we don't want to walk into that vulnerability piece, right? Of course, we want somebody to answer our request for connection with acceptance, with love, with willingness and openness, right? Of course, we want those things. And yet, if we demand that, if we require that, is that genuine connection? Right? Is that movement that's offered to us in return from love, or is it offered to us in a version of a fear? Right? And then I kind of circled around a little bit and I was like, to me, it's can they be moved from their heart space? That's what equals that beautiful ability for them to partner and be in the therapy space. So I kicked her my idea. It kind of went over not so well, but here's my idea of how we can move from this place of love, right? That by moving away when I feel a demand coming into me that has no space for me in that, that's one, healthy protection. And then two, I'm not kicking at it. I'm not threatening at it. I'm not like going after it and trying to kill it like it's a threat. I'm just simply saying that's not a response that I want to work with, right? And by them who they don't have words moving away or waiting, looking, saying, can you ask me that in a different way? That's all opening to that dialogue that lets it move into love and compassion. The moving away is actually what I call clean compassion, because if they had stayed, if they had endured that discomfort of that demand and appease the discomfort of the fears within inside that being, like they would be enabling, coddling, shadow pitying, like pitying the client, and therefore not inviting them into wholeness and love, right? Because that love is there trying to find its way through, right? And moving away was actually the doorway that was brought to them from their own sentience, from their own heart, that brought forward love and compassion to help the other find a different doorway that would give them more what they truly desired, which is true connection. But the fear, just like with the rock or whatever object you picked, was in the way, keeping her from being able to connect, touch, sense, see, feel, interact with that in a way that actually allowed her to move in to clearing those fears and seeing that there was another way that wanted to be born and part of her. So I will say, in me pointing this out, it wasn't exactly met with excitement because it wasn't ready. It was met with discomfort. It was met with defensiveness. It was met with disappointment. It was met with wanting to get in the trenches with me and argue semantics of words and everything else like that. And I just kind of nodded and let the waves come and go and come and go and let the atmosphere, like Osho is like talking about, be one of just witnessing those waves of that fight, right? And not trying to stop it and also not trying to feed it, not trying to channel it, just like letting them come, letting them go, letting them be witnessed. Every once in a while, lobbing in a little question, a little like inquiry, a little like insight to be able to be with that movement of that struggle, to be with that movement of looking to figure out how do I connect to this thing, to be in that idea of I'm noticing how my body is responding through words, through thoughts, through ideas. How can I lovingly, compassionately challenge those ideas? And so that I can start to unwind from one way of being and open myself up to the vulnerability of the other way of being, of moving from love. So one of the things that I say is like controversial at is like, if you ever try to meditate in someone who's like, oh, we work through this style, this room is very noisy, it's hectic, it's all over the place because the room itself is not meditating for you. It's not quiet, it's not still, everybody's not on the same page. Some people are moving, right? Because that's what their body is needing to do. And some people are moving into stillness. Some people are moving into a sound, wanting to go. It's all over the place. Some people are laughing, some people are playing, some people are like all over the place. And yet there's also the invitation to find the stillness, to get to the place where maybe they're just sitting and swaying or moving on their feet in a figure 8 pattern, right? And to where that can come to center, to stillness, to finding what movement wants to come forward next and allowing that to express itself. So it's a bit of a wild ride. In there, if you're used to this idea that meditation has to be very quiet, very calm, very serene, little music in the corner, the candles, and the room itself is meditating for you. Like, this is no, put yourself in the middle of the busiest city street. He was from India, like that's like a lot of movement, and that is the meditation. Can you find that stillness within that leads you into movement that's correct for you and correct for the overall highest good and benefit of all? And so one of his other teachings is it's not about trying to solve the problem, because like this beautiful client was trying to solve the problem of the horses would not come to her. And if she had stayed focused on the horses would not come to her, she only had the option to go to either she was wrong or the horses were wrong. And so it was much easier for her to put that over to the horses than it was to bring it to herself. Because was she really wrong? No, she just had a habitual movement within her that had attachment to a certain perspective, right? And the other one was, hey, if we can let go of the fear of the vulnerability, what if they don't pick me? What if I'm rejected when I do the reach, right? What if it doesn't go the way I want it to and it's clunky, it's all over the place, right? All of that is what we're asked to lean into if we don't just move from the fear, right? The hey, Michelle, you don't have therapy horses, that was movement from fear. The movement from love was like, whoo, what is it that I'm asking for? What is it that I'm looking for? And really, truly, what is it that I'm afraid of getting in return if I don't get a compliance and what I need? And so it's the motivation behind our requests that we're asked to like step into with this quote. Don't move from fear forcing you into movement. Be guided and moved into love, right? From love, with love, into love, all the above. So that when we get there, we're not bound up. Because like his teaching says, if we're trying to just solve a problem, when we get to that place where that problem is, quote, solved, chances are there's another problem that's going to pop up, another problem that's going to pop up, another problem that's going to pop up. And so if we're just trying to solve problems, we are never in a state of stillness. We're never in a state of response. We're in a state of just reactivity, movement, habitual mindsets, and running off of tapes that no longer serve us. So, whereas if we switch gears, we go, okay, we don't want to do that. Then what do we want to do? If we want to move where love is inviting us to allowing the solution to come forward that would best serve ourselves and the other, right? Because instead of just a me-centered point of view, like what was happening with that client, because the wounded parts of her were little. That is the center that we see the universe from, right? We see it from when we're little. And the only thing that we have the ability to see is from that me-centered. We don't have the literal capacity in our mind to see it from other ones. We have to develop that. We have to feed that. We have to nurture that. And if that's not developed and fed, then we just don't have it, right? And so as we start to bring in this, can I sit? Can I reflect? And then can I allow the solution that's going to best meet this current situation to be bubbled forward? Am I willing to move into movement with that? And this was the other reason why it's a little bit controversial is, like it's the idea that once I shared this with my client and they had that aha moment, and she did, she eventually, like after wave, we got there and she was like, oh, I see it. I'm afraid that they won't be there if I really give them choice. And so that's that aha. She saw the solution. Now, the next little hole that we fell into was now that I have that solution, I'm gonna, like, if my eyes were closed and I was meditating and I feel this thing, I'm gonna peek an eye open and I'm gonna be like, did it change? Is the horse now in front of me? Is like whatever was the problem and the me having to go into that messy middle of trying and trying again and adjusting and moving into stillness, is it, like I can't wink like hardly at all. So like peeking through that one eye, it's like, is it changed? And one of his teachings that he brought us into is like, no, it's not going to change until you go into motion and you just start trying. So, like, if you have a flat tire on a car, is one of his examples, and you sit under a tree and you meditate and you get the idea that you need to change the tire on the car, and then you open up your eye and you're like, did it change? Like, it's going to ask you to step into motion with that changing of the tire, whatever that is, calling for help, doing it yourself, flagging somebody down. There are action steps that are going to need to go with that awareness. And so it can't just be one of the other. So, one of the things that we had to invite her into is like, hey, now that you've got this, let's start trying. Let's see if we can move our body from here to there. Assess what's happening in there. Can we move it from here to here and see what it is? And so the solution that she wanted to come forward, that she wanted to interact with the horses from a new way, and from that love inside of her, didn't just automatically shift and the horses were right there. Sometimes it does work that way, but most of the times it doesn't, right? We need to do a few steps in between and try. So the fear, though, is what in that try gets us to think we got it wrong, that we heard it wrong. We didn't get the right one because it didn't instantly shift. The problem didn't just instantly go away. We're still having to move through motions with it. And so a lot of that is also in there, which is why we need the patience that we talked about in episode 14 of being that part of nature and slowing down and trusting in that divine timing and not thinking that we somehow missed something, got it wrong, or mishooked. Like we just want to go into that pause, see like, hey, did I miss something? We can definitely do that U-turn. But if we get, no, you're good, keep trucking. It's just in that process of moving. If we do need to course correct, it's a beautiful stillness that will give us what that is, right? And so as this beautiful client worked, she really had to keep pausing and reminding herself to bring herself into that willingness to be vulnerable with that inner request of connection, to be vulnerable with another being, maybe having syncing up to our desires and also maybe not. And does that mean that she's not worthy of that request, or she's not worthy to connect to, or that other being isn't worthy? No, the answer is a adequate no all across the board, because we're always worthy of beautiful love and connection. But our system doesn't know it. And we have that mental being in between us and that felt sensation of the truth that we're always worthy, right? And so that was a journey that was launched on in that day from a horse just simply following its own guidance and saying, I'm going to move away, right? And it launched her into that beautiful exploration to free herself from fear, moving her to love, moving her. So the last client story that I really want to share, which I think just really brings this forward, I share it in my book, The Horse Cure, and I put the link down below. And I also have a free chapter that has this story, this little caveat, this moment in time written out. So if you like it in the written form too, you can do that. You can go down there, click on that, and get that free chapter, or you can even get the whole book. Right. And this was when I was working at a residential facility before I started Unbridled Change. And it was for at-risk youth that were really had a lot of trauma in their background. And so they were in a therapeutic environment to really dive in and try to free up some of that weight of the different attachment issues and trauma that they'd experienced in their life. And there was this one beautiful client, her name, well, the name I gave her, I think in the book, is Gwen. And so Gwen was, she had just one of those histories that you just feel for. you're just like, of course, like how could she trust in anybody? Because everybody who was supposed to have one of those labels, that was supposed to be there to protect her, to keep her from harm, were the people that were ushering her right into it, selling her into that to meet their own needs. And so, of course, she's going to have some trust issues. And of course, she's going to have some resentment and some anger issues and all these other things. She had been working towards actually being adopted. A beautiful family had come forward. She had been on the quote roster to be adopted a couple times. Didn't work out. She came back in, and this family and her were really getting close. Like they had made it through a couple different home visits, and the family was really willing to work with her, and she really liked the family, and it was really wanting to go there. Well, she'd come back from a home visit, and she had just like thrown a stick of dynamite in there. She was like, "This is too vulnerable. They're actually picking me, and I don't know what to do with that, right?" And so she was blowing up at the house. She was having a huge moment, and the therapist up there called me and said, "Hey, can we get an emergency session in? I really think she needs to be down at the barn with the horses." And I was like, "Okay, bring her on down." And she had been working with one of our off the track thoroughbreds. And so if you don't know anything about horses, the thoroughbreds, they're pretty reactive. They're just like thrown in. They're like, they just go. That's the only thing. They just go in a line. They only turn one direction. They actually learn to push harder when you pull on them. It's a whole situation. And so he was in rehab. He was in our facility and learning how to be a horse again, and then also learning how to open up to his heart. But he's of what's called a hot reactive breed. This is important because his survival instincts are to run first, kick first, ask questions second. That should be what, in theory, everybody says a thoroughbred should do. So she was working with Barry on this activity, and it's never about the activity out here, so just know that, of standing in the box, which is like, "Hey, can I ask you to stand here while I walk around and go do something and come back?" And that's working on that trust, that respect. And how do they stand in that box? Do they stand there because they're afraid that you're going to like leave them, abandon them, or hurt them, or do anything? Or do they stand there because they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, I can hang out here for a second, no worries, I'll wait for you to go talk to your friend. I'll be right here when you get back." Like that kind of an idea. And the grass that we had in the ring, it was an outdoor ring, and so there was grass all around. And so it's a little extra of a challenge because it was like, "Hey, would Barry be willing to like stay focused on you while you could separate from him and come back? And could he just be chill with chilling there waiting and being in that process?" Okay. And so Gwen had been working on this kind of a little bit here and there. They'd had successful moments, but then he would get distracted and he would be like, "Oh, I'm going to wander off. I'll be over here while you're over there," and other stuff like that. And this particular day, she had a very short fuse because, like I said, she was in this middle of this really vulnerable place of saying, "Yes, I want to go try with this family, and my fate belongs to them. If they accept me, if they say yes to me, if they're willing to work through my ups and my downs and my flares that I just am going to have before I can find the movement of love," she didn't think that that was going to happen, right? And so she proceeded to just snatch up Barry by his halter and like tromp him into the middle of this ring and like demand that he like stay there. And at first I was like, "Oh no, you did not just do that to that horse." I was like, no, this is not okay. And then some part of me, the part though that was moved from love, said, "Wait, Michelle, wait. Look at Barry. You're okay." And I looked at Barry, and Barry had moved from point A to point B. When he could have very well, he's 1,200 pounds. He doesn't have to move just because somebody tells him to, right? And he knows that. He had gone through enough of his awakening to know that his heart could guide him. So I was like, "All right, Barry, this is all you," because there's a part of me that wants to shut this down right away. So I'm trusting and guiding in you and your divine timing and your guidance. So she proceeded to just say, "Stay there." And she started to walk away. And he was like, "Yeah, no." And he put his head down, started munching on grass and like walking away, like stepping on the lead rope. He's like, "What?" And so she got mad and she walked over again, snatched him back up and says, like, started saying not so nice things to him and putting him back where it was. And again, that part of me was like, "Oh no, you need to slow your roll. You need to come back and not treat people that way. And the therapist that I was working with at the time, she was like afraid because this particular client could get, once she got rolling, she was like a bulldozer. And she would like literally break things, go through things, destroy things. Cops would have to be called to get her before she would calm back down. And so nobody ever likes to let Gwen get too much steam in her thing and too much rolling. She's like, we got to shut her down. We got to like do a mindfulness activity. We got to like do something to get her down regulated in her nervous system. And I was like, nope. Actually, no, we don't. Look at Barry. He's got this. He's not reacting from fear at all. He's just acting like it's a normal day, munching on some grass. So we're going to wait. And then she went to snatch him up one more time and move him back. He broke the ground tie again. And he was like, I'm not standing in this proverbial box that you're asking me to stand in. And he walked away, and he walked away further that time. Well, she just exploded. She grabbed like those cones. We had different like props all around the arena. If anything wasn't tied down, she picked it up and chucked it. And like she picked up a traffic cone and chucked it at him with all of his might. And all he did while he was still eating was move a little bit to the side, and the cone whizzed by him. It would have hit him, but he just moved and it just whizzed by him. And at that point, I was just like, she just threw a cone. The horse. And then I was like, and look at Barry. My team had to work really hard to get my attention because my fear kept wanting me to move forward. The therapist was like, oh my gosh, she's going to break everything. We're going to have to call a cop. So her fear was guiding her. Barry was solidly in his heart. He was being guided into movement by love. And so he just moved. Like another cone whizzed by him, another thing like that, little things. Eventually she picked up like bigger stuff. Like we have barrels, like the big plastic barrels. So she picked that sucker up, and man, she chucked it, and he was like, whoop, move away from that. And what I noticed is slowly, Barry was closing the gap between her and him. And he was doing it like with his head down and just dodging and stopping and moving backwards every time something chucked at his direction, but he was closing the gap. And there came a moment where there was nothing left for her to throw. She had chucked everything that was like in a radius of her. And in that moment, Barry closed that gap like a freight train. He was like, and at first I thought he was just going to plow her over and then be like, so long, sister, like I'm out. But he didn't, which made me very happy. He like just came in super strong, took his chest into her chest, and then put his head up and over hers, right over her shoulder, and pulled her in. And she started just wailing on him, just like, let me go. I don't want you here. You can't be here. Just makes me so tender for her, like all of this pain that was inside of her. And Barry knew that pain needed to come out. And he, with his beautiful big body, closed that gap, locked her into like a headlock, basically, over the shoulder. And eventually she stopped wailing on his chest and his neck and his shoulders. And she just like gripped him, and she collapsed. Her legs buckled, and she just collapsed into his mane, just sobbing, just that deep sobs, just the ones that hardly even make any sound, but that her whole body was moving with that, right? And Barry just lowered his head, lowered her down to the ground, stayed with her, didn't step on her. She's literally in front of his legs right now, and he's with his whole neck over top of her as she's sitting. And the therapist is like, oh my God, we got to get in there. And I'm like, no, we don't. Well, look at Barry. He's got this. He's being guided by his sentience and his love, right? And pretty soon she stopped shaking, and you could tell that she was talking. And then the therapist is like, oh, gotta get in there again. I'm like, no, this is not ours. Like, we don't need to know whatever the heck is happening in here. She wants to tell us afterwards, she'll tell us. But if it doesn't happen, that's fine too. And slowly but surely, Barry started to pick up his head, and her hands were still interlaced over his neck. And so as he picked up his head, he helped her stand back up. And she kept her head buried underneath his mane for a little while. And when she came out, her poor little face was just streaked with tears and dirt from his mane, and it's like from where he had been. And the therapist was like, okay, I'm going now. I'm like, nope, because Barry was still like totally glued to her, looking at her, right? I said, just wait. And Gwen stepped back and she did a full circle around him. And he followed her with his eyes. He never moved his feet. He stayed in the box. And she did a bigger circle. And then pretty soon she did a circle that was all the way to the edges of the arena. And then she came back to him, gave him a kiss, told him thank you, and he went back to munching on some grass. And I was like, now we can go talk to her. And now we can have that process. And what she said to us, the very first thing that she said is like, he didn't leave. No matter what I did, he didn't leave. Why didn't he leave? And she was so like, that question, why didn't he leave? What did he see in me? And we were able to then dive into all the same questions of the vulnerability from the first client story in with this beautiful client, right? And help her realize that's what this family is offering to her. They don't want to leave. They would prefer we don't throw things and do all that other stuff. And yet you're worthy of that. You're worthy of a family to close that gap. You're worthy of that with yourself. And so she really woke up and she felt that movement of love versus fear. So a part of her was moving from fear. I don't think I can be vulnerable. I don't think I can open to this. I don't think I can allow myself to be in this connection, to believe that I can create something that my heart definitely wants and that somebody's going to meet me in there, right? And Barry was moving not from fear. Fear would have been get out of Dodge. The first thing that checked at him, or the first time like she jerked up his collar, or not his collar, they all call it collar, halter. I've been doing it for 20 years. I speak in the client speak. She jerked up the halter and put it in over there, like fear would have said, peace out. The thoroughbred would have said, I'm jumping out of this ring and I am going out into the pasture and you guys deal with that. That's not what he did. His heart and his soul were guiding him, cueing him on how to move, what energy to bring into that movement, what, when, how, why, and beautiful divine timing that I sure the heck couldn't have taught him how to do and didn't match what I was, parts of me were thinking, didn't match that therapeutic point of view of saying like, hey, you can't let her get there because she doesn't know how to come out of this part of her nervous system on her own. And the reality is none of that was true. She could do all of those things. And so by him closing that gap, holding her, comforting her, helping her ride that wave through that emotion, helped her come into the true fear and worry. And then this idea, this glimmer that there was a different way to move, that there was something within her that was worthy of waking up, letting go, shaking off some of that angst, that repression, that pain, that suffering, that trauma, and starting to figure out that there could be a new way to move, right? And so this week's soulful practice is in the same thing, that we have parts of us that are like the Gwen in us, that are going to snarl and throw things, hopefully metaphorically, at us and just like try to get us to leave, to let them just be in their angst. And we also have parts of us like the berry, the parts that were able to hold on to me. And as I was witnessing that and say, hey, Michelle, slow your roll, be in a different movement here. Something else is happening. And if we can give more empowerment to that side of us, the side that's willing to feel, to touch, to see, and knows how to move through it, then we can start to allow ourselves to free up the attachments to the fear movements guiding us and open to the movements like what Barry had, which was that beautiful movements of love and compassion that know exactly how to tend to those wounded, hurtful, fearful parts of us so that they can find a new way, right? And so this week's soulful practice is really to help bring some of those tools of somatic awareness, like I was talking about before. Can we sense what's happening in or around our body? Get curious about her habitual movements throughout the week, right? That idea that our life is our moving meditation. And so we're going to bring this really forward right now and getting curious about what are the inner states of our postures, of our literal movements as we go throughout like reaching for something, as we go to like pull something to us, as we respond to somebody physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And what are they housed in? Are they being motivated from protective fears, forcing us to engage in a subconscious way that isn't really how we want to be? That's not heard, that's snatched up, right? There's the other client that put hands on hips and furrowed browed and like said like what could be construed as a hurtful statement towards me and towards the horses, right? And but that's not the real them. So could I let that go, not take that personal, right? And then can I then say, what is the love inviting me into? What is it trying to engage me in conscious ways that really match my heart and my soul and the guidance and the insights that are coming from that? So in the upcoming book that I have, I'm so excited about it because it's like complete, it's done. It's actually at a publisher's right now. So fingers crossed, love all the good vibes into the universe. I have a whole chapter in 3 beautiful guided practices that are dedicated to just this, right? And so this is a mini and also a sneak peek version of what's upcoming in the book. And it's just mini practice. So I'd love to invite you to pick a favorite spot that you have that you feel comfortable with. Eventually you can move this to places that your body doesn't feel a sense of comfort and continuity and predictability with, but we're going to let's hit the easy button first, right? Let's not ask our nervous system to go straight to the all like stimulating response in the environment. So pick a room maybe that you feel you really like. If you have a meditative space, then by all means pick that space. If you have a favorite place at the park that you absolutely love, or a walking trail, or a coffee shop that you feel like you can move in, you're going to have to be able to move and engage with things. So pick something that you feel comfortable with moving with, right? And once you're in that space, I want you to simply do the first step. I want you to just scan that room with your eyes, right? Like walk around with your eyes, like what can I see in this environment right now, looking at different things like that. And then open up to the rest of your 5 senses. So what can I hear right now in this space? What can I like feel and touch? Imagine like a little kiddo, like they love to explore and actually interact with the spaces that they're in, right? Like, so they want to pick something up and touch it. And like how I saw the little M that I'd never seen before, because it's like it sits down like this, right? And so like there's a little M sitting on this beautiful little rock. It's okay with that. Is that it? Okay. And so, whoops, sorry. And can we then allow that to come in, right? And so if you feel guided, you could do, what can you smell with the things that are in that space? You can do taste if you want, but feel free to leave that one out. Just like, again, as if you're exploring that for the first time. Just explore. And then I would love for you to pause. And I want you to go back through it again, but this time, as you're exploring, be aware of any micro movements. Right? So as I reach to touch that picture, or I reach to touch a leaf that's on the ground if I'm on a walking trail, do I have a part of me that goes, "Arr"? Do I have a part of me that pulls my arm back, like literally retracts? Do I have a part of me that thinks, oh, touch the leaf, but no movement happens in this physical body? And then what's there? So when you feel that micro sensation, pause and get curious. What's that about? What's happening within me that's bringing that forward? So maybe I feel a flush of embarrassment, and I realize that there's a part of me looking around to see if somebody's going to wonder, why am I reaching down to pick up that stick? Right? Or I have a voice in my head that sounds like a parent that says, don't touch that. Don't break that. Remember what you did last time? Da, 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 da. Right? Or if I have a piece of like, what are you doing? And it's got like furrowed brows and a little tone to its voice, right? What's happening? What is the thought process, the protector that's in the way of that impulse to explore, and that stop that's keeping us from doing it, right? And just kind of get curious about that. If you know how to do like what I would call a compassionate healing interview of turning towards that part and doing an exploration and to exchange of like, well, what is that? Where did that come from? What do I need now? Great. But if not, just simply bringing in that love to it that says, hey, I get that at some point in my past, that voice had to rule me because I needed acceptance, I needed protection, I needed belonging. But that's no longer true now. So let me gather up that little one, and together we're going to reach for that stick. Together we're going to like skip through this path instead of the other one. Just see what love movement wants to come forward to help you and to express that. So this is the practice for this week. It's a little bit different, but I think you'll kind of enjoy it and have some fun with it. That's the idea that we want to start to bring to this love and this compassion, that it can have movement with it, and it can have exploration, and it can have pauses, tending to the parts of us that we need to, and also repatterning it, bringing it into a new movement. Okay, so play with that and see what it is. And so let's now set that intention in a more formal kind of way to be with us throughout this week. Nice deep breath in and out. Just feel that. I set the intention this week to explore the different types of movements that I have throughout the week. I open to a willingness to allow myself to explore moving through and from love. I ask for the intention to guide my attention to the movements which I have a habitual protective fear of reaching out, of engaging, that's stopping me, keeping me from following that guidance of my heart and soul, where I find myself restricting or withdrawing from an invitation to move in a way that I've been inspired to move. And also noticing those moments of longing, right? Because after we restrict, there's this moment of longing. I would like to connect, right? And so instead of just like forcing myself into connection, can I pause in that moment and just kind of look around? And so I ask for my attention when I find that pause to guide me to moments of awareness to engage with a new flow that is present within me too. Just like Barry, that flow is within us. The movements, the thoughts, the ideas that are all based in love, compassion, and choice. I ask for the support of the divine to help me pause, to step into my divine flow and release that habitual attachment. It's just a habit to moving from fear instead of love. And so it is. Peace, peace, peace. So this is the practice for this week. Have fun, explore, be in those different situations. Like I said, start in places where you feel totally comfortable in theory to move, to engage, to reach, whatever. And notice where there are those just micro expressions getting in the way. And then pause and get curious. What protective fears are there? And what other things like the Barry movements are wanting to come forward that are based off of love, right? And so our mind, our body, our heart, they want to be free. We don't want these burdens and these restrictions, this straight jacket on our system, right? This is really repatterning our fascia. This is repatterning the very water within us of the habits and the memory in which we move. And so I wish you luck on this one, offering you light, love, and joy as you bring your body into greater joy and freedom this week through these practices. I'd love to hear how they go. See you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to Soulful Practices. For more information on how to work directly with me or one of my guests, check out the show notes below. We'd love for you to also let us know what parts of this episode are speaking to you and how this practice is supporting you on your healing and spiritual journey. Please share this podcast with fellow seekers, travelers. Together, we can create a wave of soul-led beings in this world, offering you light, love, and joy on your journey. Michelle Holling Brooks. Until next time.